Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of GeoPath Out of Home Office Hours. Today we're going to be talking about MORE. This is the fifth in our series of MORE overview webinars. I'm Scott Fischetti, SVP of Strategy and Development for GeoPath, and I'm joined today by Dylan Maven, who's our SVP of Insights and Innovation. Hello. We're going to be tag teaming the presentation right along. And just wanted to jump in and give everybody a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So obviously we want to give everybody a quick high-level overview and demonstration of MORE. This is what we've been doing on a number of these webinars. I do want to say if you want more detail and want to see, again, this is going to be a bit of high level. Our very first MORE webinar has more detail on it. You can go back and watch that. Or if you would like an individual demonstration of it, feel free to reach out to Larry Hennessy. He can set up a meeting with us to do that, and we'll do a more detailed walkthrough of that if you like. So that's open for everybody, all our members, if you'd like that. But ultimately today we want to talk about hourly impressions, and you're going to see over the next handful of webinars that we're going to be talking more and more about this because it's an important part of what MORE is all about and a key capability of it. And we want to start educating everyone on what that means for us as an industry and how we start to use that. So Dylan's going to walk us through how we get to identifying impressions per ad unit and why that's important. But to get there, we're going to start with for the topic of just what is measurement across all the other channels, TV, radio, etc. What does that mean? And then how does that lead into ad opportunities and impressions? So how does speed and congestion kind of work with each other to impact ad opportunities and overall impressions? And then laddering into understanding impressions by hour, what that means, and then drilling down to getting into how we think about and calculate an impression by ad unit per hour. And then what are the implications of that? So as we go along, feel free to ask questions. There's a module here where you can ask questions. Dylan and I will make sure that we'll make sure that we pause every once in a while to answer any questions that you may have. Realize sometimes in a webinar setting it is hard to ask questions, but we'll do our best to make sure we get to everybody's questions as we go along. And I think that's about it for the housekeeping stuff. I want to make sure we don't keep everybody too long, and I'm going to jump right into the demonstration of Sorry about that. I don't know if hopefully there wasn't too much background noise. No, okay, so overview of demonstration of MORE. So one of the questions we often get is, what does MORE stand for, right? So measurement, optimization, ratings, enhancement. And what does that mean? What is it really about MORE? And the way we're talking about it and the way we think about it, it's a state-of-the-art audience location measurement fueled by mobile data, right? And that's an important part. The mobile data is a key aspect of what MORE is all about. And Dylan and his team over the course of the last year and a half have really been challenged with the challenge of vetting various types of data sources, various types of vendors, and to really figure out what is going to help us as an industry, the out-of-home industry, stay relevant, stay comparable to other industries with our measurement. And they landed on mobile data, and there's mobile device data as well as connected car data. There's two aspects there, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And those were the two sources that allowed us that precision and granularity that we need as an industry moving forward. Marketers are definitely using big data to target. They're using big data for a lot of different ways and a lot of different reasons, and we as an industry also wanted to be able to leverage that to stay relevant and stay competitive with other industries. And again, this new measurement to MORE is going to help us more effectively plan, buy, and sell out-of-home media overall. So what is it all about? There's multiple different data sources going into more, and I know we talk about mobile data and connected car data, but it really all still starts with traffic counts. You know, it's still going to be powered by those traffic count sources that we have. So think about a toll booth. That's considered like a traffic count source, and so because of the partnerships we're going to have and the level of data we're going to have, the number of traffic count sources is going to jump exponentially from currently about 80 to 90,000 to somewhere around 2.5 million. And so that allows us to understand those nodal points of where people are on the roads. And leveraging the mobile data, which is going to be anonymized aggregated data, and that's very important for us to always say, because we're not going to be pulling in personal identifiable information. We're going to be pulling in anonymized aggregated data, and the thing that it's going to allow us to do is to really understand people's movement, people's home location at a census block group level, which is about 1,000 to 1,500 people. We're currently, when we're looking at demographics in our measurement or those kinds of things, we're at a county level. So we're getting to, again, as I mentioned earlier, a much more precise level of measurement and a much more precise level of ultimately storytelling for us through more. And so leveraging the mobile data helps us understand those journeys. So was it a journey from home to work? Was it a journey from work to home? Was it a journey for quote-unquote other? So we'll have a little more clearer picture into that. And then leveraging the connected car data, which will allow us to understand just traffic across the entire road system. So understanding people's choices that they're making in terms of the routes that they take, understanding the speeds that they're going, and just the level of congestion, and with that, the choices that they make to get to those different traffic count sources. So ultimately, this helps us get a clearer picture of what's going on in the road system. And I also want to make sure I talk about the demographics, because we're going to be able, as I said a moment ago, have much more precise demographics at a level that we didn't have before, so about 1,000 to 1,500 people per census block group. But we're also going to be able to be pulling in behavioral data as well through some of our partnerships with partners like Esri, which you'll see in a moment when I go through the proof of concept tool. So that'll allow us to have a greater sense of behavioral characteristics, attitudinal characteristics. So again, adding to that level of storytelling that we'll be able to know and to talk about with the audiences that we're trying to reach. And then we wanted to build a tool that is as future-proof as possible. So that one that can import future data sources that as they come online, as Dylan's team vets them and they have the scalability we need, the granularity that we need, that we can start to port them into the tools, because we do want data duplication, and there is a level of data duplication in what we're building as well. We're still going to be leveraging other sources like DOTs and those sorts of data, but again, the mobile data and connected car data will be a key source. But we also want to be able to we also want to be able to pull in other future data sources. So think about malls or airports. We currently don't measure those, but as the data comes online and becomes much more robust, and if our membership wants us to, we can eventually entertain the idea of starting to pull in that data and measure those kinds of sources as well. So what does ultimately that mean for us as an industry? It's ultimately about the enhanced audience insights that we will be able to have through more. It's about that precise audience delivery. Because we will have a greater sense of actual audience delivery, actual impressions delivery, we'll have a better sense of predictive capabilities with the tool. So that greater sense of historical delivery will in turn inform and refine our predictive capabilities, if that makes sense. But also it allows us to get down to much more detailed level of granularity with our reporting. We'll be able to report by time of day, day of week, and we'll also see that seasonality that's there that we all know exists that is currently somewhat normalized out with our current measurement systems. And you'll see some of this in what we're going to talk about a little bit later today in the use case that I'll be showing near the end of the webinar. Also, we're going to have greater detailed audience capabilities, profiling capabilities, as I talked about, greater demographics through some of our partnerships with Esri, and also the behavioral segmentation, which will be in the base level tool for everyone. But also we'll have a greater sense of trip purpose. There's somewhere around 1.1 billion trips taken in this country every day, and about 45% of them involve a purchase intent to them. So now we'll have a clearer picture or a greater sense of understanding of what the intent of some of those purchase journeys were. As I said earlier, were they a journey to work, were they a journey to home, or were they for other, which typically involves potentially a purchase intent to them. And then we'll also have greater nationwide coverage of all roadside inventory of public and transit vehicles, fleet vehicles rather, and then also any new formats or environments that come on yet. Again, I previously mentioned airports and malls, but if there's other environments, other formats that are being developed currently, we will be able to port those into the tool, hopefully, as I said, if the data becomes available for us and is at a level that we feel is given, precise enough to pull into the tool. And it's also going to be a flexible web tool. So we didn't want to develop something that's a third or fourth tool that you have to log into. We know a lot of our members are leveraging some of their own platforms or working with other third parties. This tool will be working with them through our end users council and our providers council to ensure that this tool is be able to work within other current buying and selling platforms. And also I often like to talk about too the ability for be able to integrate, our members will be able to integrate their own first party data as needed. So while we said we'll have some behavioral segmentation, if a current member prefers a different segmentation that they like to work with, that could be ported into the tool as well. So it's going to be ultimately very flexible for all of our members. So I want to jump into a demonstration of the two proof of concepts that we've developed over time. And I'm pausing. I don't see any questions yet. And again, feel free to ask any questions as we go along.
Can I jump in for a second? Actually, this is Dylan.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that one thing's clear on this is that this is not just applicable to roadside inventory exclusively. This is vehicular audience. We're also going to be having information on the fluctuations and demographics of pedestrian audiences. We'll be able to really measure with unprecedented precision both audience segments or both core audience types in all venues. And this is also going to be working with our public transportation measurement as well.
Cool. Great point. Thank you. So what's up here now is one of our first proof of concept tools that we developed. I'll have you turn so you can get the full effect of it. Uh-oh. There we go. Sorry, running a little bit slow. Okay, sorry. Just wanted to make sure everybody was seeing that. So, so this is the first tool, and we developed two tools. This one is set up in terms of packages, and it's built with data from October 2015. And why we built these tools was to really help us explore and understand what we can do with the data, this level of data that we are going to be having. So this is for the Chicago CBSA. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. You can see in relation to it. And this is for a set of roadside inventory of set of bulletins on I-294 in the northwestern suburbs of Chicago. And you can see it's outside of the downtown area, and it's fairly close to O'Hare, which I believe is right about here. And this is set up for a series of 13 boards. And again, this may not be a package you would ultimately put together, but it allows us to understand certain capabilities of the data and the tools as we're developing this. And again, I do want to reiterate this is all proof of concept, so we are working with our end users council to actually develop the core feature set and functionality set. So you can imagine all the stuff that we're going to be showing you today will have ultimately more bells and whistles and will ultimately be together in a tool, not as separate pieces of functionality. So one of the benefits of this package that we set up is that these are 13 boards. They're all south-facing, and we know that when people enter here near North Ave, that there are no exits And so everybody sees all sets of this inventory until they pass them all. So what does that tell us? Well, if you look over here on the right, we know that the daily unique circulation is 82,137 people. And that's not cars any longer, it's actual people. And it's because of the mobile devices and the connected car data, we're able to understand that at that level now. And with this setup, you know, there's 13 boards, the 82,000 times 13 gets you to that daily total circulation of 1 million. And then adding in, you know, our visibility adjustment index gets us to that 10 million impressions. But some of the key things I want to talk about are this in-market circulation. So now, because of knowing the home location of the devices, we have a greater sense of in-market versus out-of-market circulation. So at a CBSA level, which is a much greater sense than we had previously. So we're able to tell where people are coming from outside the CBSA. So you can see, because the CBSA, the Chicago CBSA, and you can definitely see for the set of bulletins, again, people probably using it to circumvent downtown Chicago, get to the airport, or continue on their driving up towards like Wisconsin, western Illinois. So you can definitely see a greater density of devices coming from this regional area, so Wisconsin, northern Chicago, northern Illinois rather. And the deeper the blue, the deeper the density of devices coming from those locations. So you can see that grade of blue. But also, we know where people are coming from other parts of the country. So you can see here 1.1% of that 15% out of market are coming from Los Angeles, California, and seeing that set of inventory every day. But also we know that, you know, out of home is often a local story, a very local story. So this view shows us the home locations of those devices that are in market. And you could see, again, helping visualize something we may have already known, but again, it's adding a level of detail, a level of data that we didn't have before. So you can see a much heavy density around where those boards are located, but again, feathering out, but staying pretty much in the northwestern suburbs of Chicago. So around that roadway, you can imagine, you know, people that live around there are using it to get quickly to and from places within that northern suburban area. So for comparison, you know, we wanted to show another set of shelters downtown Chicago. So very different area, right? You can imagine a lot of business travelers, a lot of family vacationers in this area. And given that it's a set of shelters too, much greater reach is needed, so greater circulation, to generate that same roughly 10 million impressions. So you can see here, this is a package of about 45 to 50 boards, plus or minus, and with a daily unique circulation of 343,000 plus people. And again, this, what Dylan brought up before, is even more relevant here. So it's not just cars, it's actual people, and it's people walking by and seeing this inventory. So you can really get a sense of the ultimate circulation here. But also the in-market and out-of-market circulation here. So 69% of people seeing this package are from in-market, with about 31% coming from out-of-market. So looking at, for comparison, looking at the counties across the country, you can see much more of the country is lit up in grays and blues, with people, with that 31% of people coming from across different parts of the country. And again, still relatively, I'd say a wider swath of regional travel, but also, like going back to that Los Angeles example, almost 3%. So just doing the quick math, you can figure that roughly about 3,000 people per day from Los Angeles, California are seeing that package of inventory shelters in downtown Chicago. So again, a level of detail we were excited about and haven't had as much until now. But I want to, again, for comparison's sake, show the shelters downtown block groups. So again, these are the home locations of people coming from, you know, seeing this set of packages. package in downtown Chicago. So again, heavily density of devices in the downtown area and feathering out, across some of the closer in suburbs of Chicago, up near Evanston, out towards Aurora and Joliet. But again, comparing that to the I-294 tells a different story. And again, I think that's one thing for me personally that always excites me about is this ability to storytell that we're going to have that we never, not that we never had before, but that it's going to enhance our ability to tell stories about our audience and understand our audience. So I'm going to jump to the second proof of concept tool. I'll kind of pause a little bit as I'm doing that just to see if there's any questions that anybody might have. I'll give you a chance to type them in and ask. I'm going to stick with Chicago for the example. And this is a second proof of concept tool that we developed that has inventory loaded in, and you can see on the left how the plants listed out as well as the different media types. So you can start to filter here. I want to choose bulletins, maybe digital bulletins, and you can see how on the right it ultimately starts to filter. And then if you want to pick a few different providers, you start to be able to get your setup, and then now you can zoom in and start looking locally and zoom in and figure out, okay, well, what's going on really with this inventory that we've filtered out. So I'll pick a couple different pieces so you can show. So this piece of inventory, it's an out front bulletin, all the basic information you'd expect, right? You have PAB panel ID, which way it's facing, etc., and your ratings, your weekly ratings. And that's another thing I don't think I mentioned, but I do want to make sure everybody's aware of. The only thing that's changing really is the data sources for this. We're still going to be talking about impressions. So you know with IZON we had to move from DEC to impressions. We're still going to be talking about impressions here. It's the level of granularity that's going to be changing for us. So you'll see, your weekly impressions, GRPs, reach frequency, etc. But here's what I was talking about earlier with the ESRI or Esri tapestry segmentation that we're going to be able to start leveraging to really provide an understanding of, who's actually seeing the pieces of inventory. And Esri is their partner behind the mapping capabilities of the tool itself. And they mapped out pretty much the entire country and are able to pull in other data sources like MRI data or Experian credit card data. And through all this information, have come up with a series of 67 different segments that ladder up into these broader life modes here, like upscale avenues you're seeing here, or affluent estates, etc. But this collage here of different colors shows the different segments, the life mode segments that are over-indexing for that piece of inventory. And so ultimately, like each piece of inventory has its own unique profile, right? Its own unique group of people that it's reaching. So I'll pick another piece of inventory, and you can see how this will change. So upscale avenue is still fairly prominent, but now you see ethnic enclaves becoming more prominent. And as you start to scroll around the area, the greater Chicago area, and pick different areas, you can see how the different inventory changes and its profile changes, its ultimate group of people that it's reaching changes. And there's going to be a lot of information on these people. So I'll click one. So up and coming families is a segment. And you can see as I click there, the left changed a little bit. So you can see these neighborhood areas, these polygons, represent areas where that segment, this up-and-coming families, is the predominant segment. It doesn't mean that they don't exist in other areas and other segments, but these are where you can find them, that they're the predominant segment. And you can also see that the inventory changed color, and that represents all the inventory that is over-indexing for delivering that segment. And who are up-and-coming families? Well, they're married couples, about 31 years old, just over 3 people per household, live in single-family housing, visit theme parks and zoos. They have student loans and mortgages. They go online shopping for entertainment as well. Another key thing here that I want to point out is the audience for this piece of inventory that I've selected. So while up-and-coming families are 2% of the market, they are 17% of this audience for this piece of inventory. So you can really see that this piece of inventory way over delivers on delivering that segment. That's the key segment that you want to reach. And also, as part of the core capabilities of this, there'll be more information on these segments. So up-and-coming families, a little bit more about who they are, their median household income, the neighborhoods they live in, more about them. So new suburban, periphery, new families in new housing subdivisions, some socioeconomic traits in terms of, are they hardworking labor force with participation rate of 71%, low unemployment, careful shoppers. So you start to understand who they are as a group, who they are as people, but also more data on them as well in terms of how they're spending their money. I always like this part, this average household budget index. So you can see like what they're spending their money on and how. And this group tends to be pretty much, on average, close to the index of 100, spending a little bit less on apparel and services, but spending a lot on retirement, so Social Security, and entertainment and those kinds of things. And on the right down here, you see the different clusters of jobs that they have and the different salaries. So a lot of management as well as administrative and office support here. But then also a little bit more about them in terms of anecdotal information. So carry debt from credit card balances to student loans and mortgages, but also maintain retirement plans and make charitable donations. So again, giving us more of a sense of who we're reaching, who we can potentially reach, and what they're all about. And I'll go back quickly and just pick one. I'll show you one more example, and then I'll hand it off to Dylan to take us through some of the other stuff we're going to talk about today in terms of our early impressions. So again, you can see this one I clicked on. This is the boom burbs. So again, where they over-index in terms of where you can most likely find them in terms of neighborhoods, inventory that over-indexes on them. They're married couples, a little bit older, 34 than the previous segment, have a home mortgage, hold gym memberships, prioritize physical fitness. But again, a little bit definitely higher income, higher median household income, and then some similar information, socioeconomic traits in terms of how they spend their money. You can see they're way over-indexing on how they're spending their money. So you get the sense that this is a much more higher net worth segment than the previous segment. So I think there was one question. I'm going to hand it off to Dylan, but then I'll check that question as we're going along and try to answer that for us all. So I'm going to switch it over. And let me try to get that question answered.
Thank you, Scott.
Yep.
So what I want to talk about next is really just getting back to some of the reasons why we are reevaluating and rebuilding our measurement foundation here at GeoPath, and just to get back about how we fit into the measurement landscape as a whole across all media. So this may be redundant for some people, but bear with me. This is important stuff. Just make sure I have control of the screen.
As you're doing that, I can answer a couple of questions that came up. So there's a question about if this information will be integrated into Do Media, AdStruct, those kinds of partners. And yes, that's there. We're working with all of those partners through our Providers Council, so that when we launch this, this will be part of their tools as well. This information, and the entire development timeline for more is 15 months, but you will see stuff rolling out over the course of even as early as next quarter, some level of information. But then with the first prototype tool rolling out in mid-year, and then getting more and more features and functionality added to that. And I think that answers the questions, but I'll go back and see as Dylan talks. I may, as we have transitions, I'll try to answer other questions as well. So sorry, hand it off back to you, Dylan.
Oh, okay, thanks, Scott. So I think I have control back now again. There we go. So at the core of what we are talking about, as Scott was saying earlier as well, we are still talking about impressions. We're not changing the currency. We are just changing how we calculate it. We have better data now. The stuff that didn't exist 10 years ago, even 5 years ago for that matter. So at the core of it is impressions, and this is basically the definition of impressions across all media types. And impressions are the total number of exposures to an advertisement. Everyone should be familiar with that. And exposures here are pretty vague because there are different types of impressions depending on the media type that you're working with. But another point to note is that when you're talking about impressions, that one person can receive multiple exposures for the same ad campaign across multiple channels. And so impressions are not unique. That's when you start talking about reach. So impressions are the gross audience that you're delivering in a campaign. So there's a couple different types of impressions that are out there. In the digital world, you hear things called served impressions. This means that the ad was delivered to the advertising space. In the case of like your browser on your computer, the ad server is going to deliver the content to be displayed, but you may never scroll down to the bottom of that website, so the ad's never displayed on the screen. Were it displayed on the screen, it would be counted as a viewable impression. Viewable impressions are an opportunity to see metric. It says that the audience had the chance to see something. It doesn't say anything about whether or not they saw it or not. And then there's audience impressions, which are actual seen impressions, people that have actually seen the advertisement. And that was one of the big steps that Geopath went through 10 years ago with moving from DEC to Eyes On. DECs were a circulation metric. It was this is how many people are driving by, number of vehicles in that car, number of people in the car, and that just gave you basically a viewable impression number. But for an interstate that had, or let's say a major road that had a large bulletin and a transit shelter right next to it, we knew that the media was delivering audiences in a different way at a different rate because there was a viewability difference. The larger bulletin, if it was closer to the road and larger, would be easier to see than if something that was smaller and further away. That's something that we were able to go out into the field and collect research and apply visibility model, and now we have audience impressions, and that's what we report. And it's much more relevant to actually the audience that are consuming your message. So just to break it down again, served impressions are delivered impressions, but not necessarily able to be seen. Viewable impressions are viewable impressions. And then audience impressions are impressions where the audience actually saw the advertisement. Now in the out-of-home world, viewable impressions, total number of ads able to be seen by the audience passing the advertising space. Prior to the advent of digital, that was always one opportunity per person per pass, right? If you're driving down the road, that digital, that non-digital screen, that print or vinyl or that painted wall was one opportunity as the person drove by. With the advent of digital, you can now deliver multiple ads to a person as you drive by, because that ad may, or that structure may change as the individual drives by. Actually, I'm going to correct myself. It was before digital. There was Trivisions, and so there was an inventory that rotated. That was probably the first time where the ad changed during the dwell time when the audience was nearby the board. So just to get back to that, all right, so what we report today are impressions, but we have to get there by first talking about viewable impressions, which are opportunities. So let's talk about how we get to ad opportunities and then impressions, because this is important. We're just going to go over sort of explaining the process of how we calculate things here. So we need opportunities first, and then how many people saw the ad. So first and foremost, we need to know how many people were in the environment. So on the roadways, or in vehicle, or walking, or people in train stations or subway stations. We need to know how many people are there first and foremost. So we have circulation information on the total people on the roadway. We have that with a level of precision that we've never had before. With more, we're going to have this for every hour of every day for the entire year. That's a very precise and very high resolution of information, something that we didn't have before. We only had one annualized number, only one weekly number to go into this. And as you all know, people that commute a lot on congested roadways, the more people that are on those roadways, the slower the traffic becomes. So as volume increases, speed decreases, and you have congestion. Well, one of the other benefits of congestion is the fact that you spend a longer time, maybe not for you, but for the audiences of outdoor media, spend a longer time in front of those digital units. So the digital units can deliver more than one ad per person as they're driving by. Now, this is a severe example of congestion. This is from the Dan Ryan Expressway in Chicago. We like to use this one. So the average speed on Friday gets down to about 8 miles an hour. So people are driving at an absolute snail's pace. And during those periods of time, it can take upwards of 1.5 minutes to drive by these billboards. So there's many, many, many ads that can be seen. Whereas if it was just a print media, it's one opportunity, albeit it's a very different opportunity. You could put more elaborate creative on there, much different message than you would be on a digital, but digital can deliver multiple ads on the same space. So we need to make sure that we're all in alignment on this to understand that the impressions are the total number of exposures. So that's each one of those opportunities for each person of an advertisement is what we really need to get down to as our foundation. For non-digital units, it's going to be one per person. For digital units, it's often going to be more than one. So as there's more people on the road at peak audience hours, there's slower speeds. Slower speeds mean more opportunities per person. So these two factors really complement each other, and so you get massive audience delivery during periods of peak congestion on digital units. So what does this mean? Right? For digital units, that means that speed directly impacts the number of ad opportunities and therefore the number of impressions that are going to be delivered per person. And this is really important because we now have this information by hour, which means we can report it by hour and make decisions on it and strategize based upon that. So let's talk about impression by hour. Now we've addressed this a little bit in the past, but we're going to break it down one more time. So here's a comparison of that same structure if it were a print piece of print billboard versus a digital billboard. And again, this is an extreme case. Your mileage may vary. This is just to prove, to show the extreme cases of how a digital unit can dramatically increase the total audience being delivered at a particular location. And so this digital unit has these big peaks and valleys, so it delivers a massive amount of audience at 5 p.m. So we know the total number of impressions during that hour. Now this unit is, let's use 8 seconds as the ad length on this unit. So in each hour, if you take 60 minutes, 60 seconds, that's 3,600 seconds. Divide that by 8 seconds, there's 450 individual 8-second ads being displayed on that screen. So you can actually calculate the number of impressions being delivered per commercial, per play. In the middle of the night at 2 a.m., it's less than 1 impression per play. In the afternoon at 5 o'clock, when there's hundreds of vehicles parked in front of this billboard at a snail's pace moving by, it's about 47 impressions per 8-second ad that's played on that screen. And this is really, really important because this is the level of detail now that we'll be able to feed to our members, to feed to their software systems, to feed to buying and selling platforms. And this is the bit of information that's really going to allow out-of-home to be bought and sold in the similar ways that it is in other media, looking at particular audiences, particular ad delivery at a particular time of day throughout the entire year. So some really great stuff coming out of this. We're, again, really excited to see how people are going to utilize this to make smarter decisions when they're planning and buying. And with that, if there's any questions.
Don't see any new questions. So
All right.
I'll,
And Scott has a great little use case to talk about how variation in audience can be utilized to make decisions. And this, again, applies to every single type of inventory, regardless if it's digital or non-digital.
right. And, you know, some of you may have seen some of this before, but there's slight variation on this that we want to talk about. So, you know, as Dylan was saying, you know, it's really important for us to start to understand and really realize what is behind some of our measurement right now. So this is reflecting the entire year for one piece of inventory. So hourly impressions from January 1st to midnight all the way through the end of the year. And you can see there's a lot of variation going on in here, right? There's some seasonality, but not a ton with this particular piece of inventory. But there is some level of seasonality. There's some level of monthly variation that's in here as well. But specifically, even you can see this weekly variation as these peaks and valleys throughout the week start to happen. But currently, what we're able to show will be, because of our annualized measurement, is this, right? It's ultimately a straight line across the month. The number in January is the same as the number in December. So now we're going to be able to get down to this level of granularity of what's actually behind the red line. And as you know, as you start to dig into any particular average week, each week starts to tell its own unique story as well. And as you look through a week with its different peaks and valleys throughout the week, you can again start to understand the variation, start to tell greater stories about that. So you can see over here on the left on Sunday, you know, you can imagine people are, you know, starting less people out overall. You can see getting out a little bit later in the day, you peak kind of with impressions kind of around early afternoon, and then people get home getting ready for their work week. And then you start to see that familiar morning rush, evening rush with that trough in the middle. But that builds across the week, ultimately to Friday, where you can imagine a lot more people on the road, a lot more people eventually you can imagine trying to get out of work, leave work early, get their weekend going, get out of town, whatever that may be. So the peaks of the impressions, you know, ultimately increase. And again, you can imagine the congestion is also increasing on the roads as well. And then that trails off and you get to the familiar weekend pattern. But again, overall more people out than on the previous Sundays. But again, with that pattern holding higher and longer across the day itself. And what does that mean? Well, you know, you start to understand and see that, you know, each type of day, each average type of day has its own unique pattern, its own unique audience flow. So, you know, you get your weekday averages, your weekend averages. And again, this will vary somewhat for different pieces of inventory, where it's located, what type of inventory it is. But they'll each have their own unique audience profile for every day of the week and every hour of the day. And again, now knowing this, we're able to start to leverage this as an industry to make more informed decisions and more informed recommendations. So this idea of understanding the unique audience profile allows us to help make more informed decisions and recommendations. So this is a real life example that we've been using. I put it in quotes, you know, because it is a use case. So this is Butcher and the Burger. It's a trendy burger joint in Chicago, 1012 West Armitage Ave, if you guys want to go visit it. You know, a nominally priced dish is about $10, so, you know, it's the kind of thing that potentially could be a spur-of-the-moment decision. You're making plans after work to decide where do you want to go out with your friends, you want to meet the family there, etc. Some interesting dishes. You can see on the bottom left, picture of some of their main courses. But again, their current target is millennials, well-educated millennials, hyper-digital, so using their mobile phones extensively, other devices as well, spending heavily on food, housing, and education. So knowing that, you know, and let's say they've made some changes to their menu, want to promote their new dinner menu. So how do we help them best reach their audience? So these are three different pieces of inventory, pretty much almost delivering the exact same audience, you know, delivering the exact same amount of impressions. I think there's some slight variation here, but ultimately pretty close to being the same for all three. And from this distance, great, they all look great. But as we start to layer in and understand audience, delivery for each piece of inventory, you start to see that each piece of inventory tells a different story. So you start to see the location on the left really is delivering that target audience much more in the morning hours than in the evening hours. Whereas the B delivers the audience pretty consistently throughout the day and is fairly representative of the overall distribution of the impressions. Whereas location C on the right starts to deliver at that moment of when they're starting to make those decisions. And again, all of these could work together great in a package, and all of these could work together in an overall campaign. But now we're able to understand and can influence or impact creative messaging. We can influence what kind of packages we want to put together and when and where and how we want to deliver. Because we're not saying that C is the only one you should choose, but because any impression is a good impression. Any impression to that audience is helpful, and we now know when those impressions are most likely to be delivered because of understanding the audience movement throughout the day and understanding the hourly impressions being delivered to them throughout the day. So again, you can see how this type of information can inform how packages put together, as well as potentially even creative messaging as well. So that was what we wanted to talk about. I know there was one question I want to go back to, and then I just see a current question came up. So there was a question back with more when we're showing the tool, that question on whether an operator's inventory could be shown by the displays that index the highest against the Esri segmentation. And ultimately, yes, all of this, and Dylan could check me on this as well. So I hope I'm not saying anything that's not true, because we are now in the early stages of development, and these kinds of questions really help inform what gets developed and what the features and functionality that needs to get developed. So my understanding of the question is, I want to be able to see my inventory and how it over-indexes for certain segments in Esri, and that is a capability that should be pretty easy to build into the tool. And
I can chime in on that. Yeah, what Scott's saying is correct. We are going to be able to select inventory, or you could filter inventory based upon whether or not they index over other inventory in the market, other inventory of the same media type, or if they over-index versus the market population. And the market definition can also be more flexible than it is today. Currently, we're working with DMA, CBSAs, and county-level building blocks. In the future, we can work with clusters of zip codes or census tracts. So think of it as instead of working with municipal boundaries, you could use the service area or trade area of a retail location or a set of retail locations to do a local plan or a regional plan. And because this is structured with a flexible, that flexible utility in mind, you could also do a national plan. It can all be rolled up to whatever geography the audiences come from. Because we have it at such a precise level, that really opens the door for lots of different ways of doing that.
Cool. Thanks, Bill. And there was one more question that came up. So I'll pretty much read it, and because I think it's a good one. Currently, when we look at impressions, we're looking back based on whatever the latest impression data is. Let's say it's Q2, but we're looking back at something that ran in Q1. So with the new system, will we be able to put in exact dates of something that ran in order to determine exact impressions from the specific campaign?
I can take this one. Yes, you will be able to put in precise dates of the campaign. That historical functionality is going to be rolling out towards the end of our timeline, but it is something that's going to be built into it. And that's part of the fact that we need to start collecting all this information to create this historical product. And then as far as the predictive function of the product, it will be as predictive as possible. It will be essentially staying with the traffic patterns of the population as we currently know it to be. Predicting the future is always a little bit challenging. We haven't cracked that one yet.
Mm-hmm. So one more question came in too. with Esri data, if the advertiser's audience doesn't line up with some of the predetermined audience profiles, will we be able to customize audience segment, or is that where bringing in your own third-party data comes into play? So I'll start this, and maybe Dylan would want to add to it. So there's also one thing that we didn't show today is just that there's a host of other data that you'll be able to some slice and dice by. So we'll be able to have market potential information as well as purchase behavior information. So within that, you'll start to be able to segment out certain different segments and somewhat customized segments. But also, I think the second part of your question was like, you know, will you be able to port in other data, and is that what that meant, what I meant by that? And yes, if there's certain segments that maybe your client wants or that you frequently work with, that potentially could be ported into the tool that just, you know, you see as you remember. But also just know that there's going to be other levels of data available for us as well that you'll be able to segment the data by.
You know, one of the functions that this is going to be able to facilitate is if you're working with a client or an advertiser, and let's say they have their own profile of zip codes that they'd like to target. They know how many, they either have their own customer file, and they know the zip codes that they want to retarget their existing customers, or they want to do some sort of conquest and they understand sales of a competitive product by zip code. You could look at what pieces of inventory deliver audience from people that live in those zip codes by time of day now throughout the year. So it is really a flexible tool that is going to be relevant to lots of different strategies. And that's kind of the intent of its design.
And there was just one other question about where the data comes from, so the data sources. I think in relation to this, it seems like the mobile data, where we're getting that and how we're receiving that. So, I mean, ultimately we are partnering with AirSage, and they will be receiving the mobile data in an aggregated, anonymous fashion. I always want to make sure we always say that when we're talking about the data from carriers. And we will receive the file in that anonymous aggregated form and allow us to work with that information.
Right. So the suite of data sources that are going into that, AirSage doesn't only work with carriers. They also have access to other device-level data coming from GPSs and coming from connected cars. And so all of those pieces are put together to then create a very detailed understanding of how people move from one location to the next. That then goes into our partner software, CityLabs. These are the two groups behind the Streetlytics tools, and they create the custom data set that we're now building for the industry. So it's a partnership with everybody. And not to mention some of the other pieces as far as the demographics. The demographics are going to be coming from Esri. We're also building and expanding the functionality of our current reach and frequency models to be more flexible, to introduce variations by time, level of cross-media mixing for both transit, roadside, pedestrian, vehicular audiences. All of that is going to greatly increase the precision and resolution of what comes out of more in the future.
Cool. So are there any other questions? I know we're coming up at the hour, but wanted to make sure we're available for any other questions. And as we're signing off, I just want to say, you know, thank you to everybody for participating today. We hope that you found this valuable and informative. And as I said in the beginning of the call, we're going to be talking a lot more and showing more examples about hourly impressions and what that means. As it is going to be an important part of the tool, and important that we all understand the potential of it. But again, we just want to say thanks for everybody's participation. Feel free to reach out. And also, as I said earlier in the call, if you want a little bit more of a detailed walkthrough of more, feel free to reach out. You can reach out to Larry Hennessy if you'd like, and we could schedule a webinar for for any particular member, or also you can watch the first webinar in this out-of-home office hours series that focused on Operation More. But thank you, everybody. I don't see any other questions, so I think we'll sign off and hope everybody has a great weekend. All right, cool. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Happy Friday.
Yeah.